Good evening. Welcome to Novara Live. My name is Bastani. We have a jam-packed show for you tonight. We'll be joined by Sian Berry from the Green Party, David Jameson. We'll be discussing polling with the SNP and events north of the border. The race for the White House is well underway. In the blue corner, Joe Biden, 81 years old. In the red corner, Donald Trump, a sprightly 78 years old. Now, you might think age shouldn't matter and that what is really important are the issues. And look, I agree. But on last night's presidential debate on CNN, the cognitive ability, particularly of Joe Biden, went from elephant in the room to great blue whale in the paddling pool. Here's President Biden talking about the issue of inequality, runaway wealth, and how taxing the super rich a little bit could be a game changer.
For example, we have 1,000 billionaires in America. And what's happening? They're in a situation where they, in fact, pay 8.2% in taxes. If they just paid 24%, 25%, either one of those numbers, they'd raise $500 billion, I should say, in a 10-year period. We'd be able to wipe out his debt. We'd be able to help make sure that all those things we need to do, child care, elder care, making sure that we continue to strengthen our healthcare system, making sure that we're able to make every single solitary person eligible for what I've been able to do with the dealing with everything we have to do with. Look, if we finally beat Medicare on the total initiative relative to what we can do with more Border Patrol and more asylum officers.
President Trump?
I really don't know what he said at the end of that sentence. I don't think he knows what he said either.
I shouldn't laugh. I mean, this is not funny, but Trump's face throughout that is just ridiculous. We have more videos to show you, by the way, of course. And believe me, somehow it gets worse. But let's just look at Trump's expression here. You can see he is totally relaxed. He hasn't the slightest concern in the world. Total relaxation. Look how his little lips are pursed down. Zero tension. He knows he's going to beat him. This doesn't look to me like somebody who's worried. Maybe you disagree. Before we go any further, let's look at some of the responses to Biden's, like I said earlier, catastrophic performance last night. To sum things up in brief, this is from The Independent and their report of how the Democratic establishment metabolized the debate. They start with this passage. Throughout the night, Biden interrupted himself, his voice hoarse and strained. It served as a bleak reminder to everyone that Democrats had nominated not only the oldest presidential nominee in history, but someone whom the public has regularly seen stumble over his words and whose fading memory came under greater scrutiny in a special counsel report. Biden has consistently trailed Trump in the polls, with many voters citing his advanced age as a reason he should not run again. Challenging Trump to a debate and throwing the normal debate schedule in the garbage was meant to come from a position of strength, showing Biden could handle the job and he could take the fight directly to Trump. Yeah, I don't think that was mission accomplished somehow. Reminder, by the way, this was Biden driving this. So how have people responded to Biden's performance? Here's what Patrick Murray, director of Monmouth University polling, posted on X. Any Democrat who is not in panic mode is the stupidest person in America right now. That's rather to the point. And here is Brianna Wu. I can't follow any point Biden is making, and I read 3 papers a day. I don't think anybody could possibly have followed Biden's point there. Donald Trump was, for once, not being needlessly horrible and nasty. It was a pretty accurate summation of what was going on. Then, I think best of all was Cenk Uygur, big dog at the Young Turks, TYT. He said this: "This is elder abuse. Democratic establishment is sick." I know he's given to hyperbole, but I kind of agree. If we stick with Biden, it's a guaranteed loss. Is this the most important election of our lifetimes or not? Is democracy on the line or not? Good questions. Here's the response over at the New York Times. Wasn't in real time, came a little bit afterwards. As you can see, these are the various op-eds In response to that debate, Thomas Friedman, Joe Biden is a good man and a good president. He must bow out of the race. Frank Bruni, Biden cannot go on like this. Patrick Healy, I'm hearing high anxiety from Democrats over Biden's debate performance. And then finally, Michelle Cottle, Ross Douthat, and Ezra Klein. I mean, Ezra Klein is like the intellectual godfather right now of the Democratic Party. After the debate, I don't think Joe Biden should be running. Absolutely extraordinary. You know, you might have seen me at the start of this, and I'm saying what I'm saying. You think Aaron Bastani has an agenda. Do you think the NYT, of all people, have an anti-Biden agenda? I don't. But perhaps most painful of all for Biden was this assessment by Van Jones live on CNN.
There is no two ways about it. That was not a good debate for Joe Biden.
Van? That was painful. I love Joe Biden. I work for Joe Biden. He didn't do well at all. He did not do well at all. And he looked, I'll give you the analysis, you kind of have the old man versus the con man. I can walk you through how I'm supposed to see it and say it, but I just want to speak from my heart. I love that guy. That's a good man. He loves his country. He's doing the best that he can. But he had a test to meet tonight to restore confidence of the country and of the base, and he failed to do that. And I think there's a lot of people who are going to want to see him consider taking a different course now. We're still far from our convention, and there is time for this party to figure out a different way forward if he will allow us to do that. But that was not what we needed from Joe Biden, and it's personally painful for a lot of people. It's not just panic, it's pain.
It's not just panic, it's pain. Sometimes when people are subtle with their language, it really conveys how bad things are, and things are really bad right now for the Democratic establishment. Let's go to some more of the debate. There was so much. People have said, why don't you live stream it? Maybe we should have. I was watching it at 2, 3 a.m. and it really was crazy. It was ridiculous. Trump was asked whether he'd accept the results of the election if he lost.
If it's a fair and legal and good election, absolutely. I would have much rather accepted these, but the fraud and everything else was ridiculous. And if you want, we'll have a news conference on it in a week, or we'll have another one of these in a week. But I will absolutely, there's nothing I'd rather do. It would be much easier for me to do that than I'm running again. I wasn't really going to run until I saw the horrible job he did. He's destroying our country. I would be very happy to be someplace else, in a nice location someplace. And again, no indictments, no political opponent stuff, because it's the only way he thinks he can win. But unfortunately, it's driven up my numbers and driven them up to a very high level because the people understand it.
What a response. I wouldn't complain that it was rigged if you hadn't rigged it. Still going. And naturally, the question of each candidate's moral character inevitably came up.
The crimes that you are still charged with, and think of all the civil penalties you have. How many billions of dollars do you owe in civil penalties for molesting a woman in public, for doing a whole range of things, of having sex with a porn star on the night while your wife was pregnant? I mean, what are you talking about? You have the morals of an alley cat.
We were right. And they deleted and destroyed all of the information. They should go to jail for that. If a Republican did that, they'd go to jail.
Thank you, President Trump. President Biden, I want to give you a minute.
The only person on this stage is a convicted felon is the man I'm looking at right now.
I've been watching these videos all day because, of course, you watch them while you're making the show, and I just keep on laughing. You know, when he said you were sleeping with a porn star on the night your wedding was, your wife was pregnant, Trump's nodding. And then you saw at the end of that, he said he's a convicted felon, and Trump's nodding. It's like, yeah, he's right. He's right. You got me. I'm a convicted felon. Yep. I slept with Stormy Daniels. What you going to do? We have had so many debates in this country, obviously, during our general election campaign. We've had like so many, 10, 12? I don't know. We've got another one tonight. And of course, stay here for that. It's worth watching. But my God, in one debate, they covered so much more. Then there came this bizarre moment where Trump somehow managed to shoehorn in the issue of Palestine.
We're providing Israel with all the weapons they need and when they need them. And by the way, I'm the guy that organized the world against Iran when they had a full-blown intercontinental ballistic ballistic missile attack on Israel. No one was hurt. No one Israeli was accidentally killed, and it just stopped. We saved Israel. We are the biggest producer of support for Israel of anyone in the world. And so there are two different things. Hamas cannot be allowed to be continued. We continue to send our experts and our intelligence people as to how they can get Hamas like we did bin Laden. You don't have to do it. And by the way, they've been greatly weakened, Hamas, greatly weakened, and they should be. They should be eliminated. But you've got to be careful for using certain weapons among population centers.
You got to ask them, as far as Israel and Hamas, Israel's the one that wants to go. He said the only one that wants to keep going is Hamas. Actually, Israel is the one, and you should let him go and let him finish the job. He doesn't want to do it. He's become like a Palestinian, but they don't like him because he's a very bad Palestinian. He's a weak one.
That's right, Donald. In the streets of Rafah and in the streets of, Gaza, across the Strip, the West Bank too, they're all saying it. We would really like Joe Biden. He's one of our own, but he's just too weak. I don't think that's happening, quite frankly. This juxtaposition of styles is just crazy. Trump saying maybe like 5-word sentences with his typical cadence versus Biden, who literally made no sense. I mean, I felt like I was on drugs watching the thing. Anyway, it gets even worse. This was possibly the most ridiculous excerpt of the whole thing, because the two men, they were attacking one another for 80 minutes nonstop, but the thing they got really angry about was golf.
You can see he is 6'5" and only 223 pounds, or 235 pounds. Well, you said 6'4", 200. Well, anyway, that's what anyway, just take a look at what he says he is and take a look at what he is. Look, I'd be happy to have a driving contest with him. I got my handicap, which when I was vice president, down to a 6. But by the way, I told you before, I'm happy to play golf if you carry your own bag. Think you can do it?
That's the biggest lie. He's a 6 handicap of all.
I was at 8 handicap.
Yeah.
8.
Never.
But I had, how many?
I've seen you swing. I know you swing.
I love it. Trump thinks that people around Biden should go to jail because of Hunter Biden, the laptop and all that. But the biggest lie of all is the golf handicap. I mean, the guy is just, somehow he makes absolutely everything so extraordinarily trivial. And also, Biden fat-shaming Trump. What is going on, people? The Green Party of England and Wales are having a strong election. Their target for after July the 4th is 4 seats, and there's plenty of polling that shows they're going to expand on their solitary seat at the moment. But a new poll released today is truly jaw-dropping. It's from YouGov and shows how British, Pakistanis and Bangladeshis plan to vote. As you can see, how Pakistani Bangladeshi Brits would vote. This is from YouGov, and it's from the 11th to 20th of June. Still, Labour in the lead amongst most people from those backgrounds, 44%, but it's down 30 points. The Greens, absolutely extraordinary. They've gone from 1% of Pakistani and Bangladeshi Brits voting for them, 1% to 29%, far above the Conservatives, the Lib Dems, Reform, and other. That is incredible. By the way, in some seats, Pakistanis and Bangladeshis are a huge, huge minority. That's something to really keep an eye on. I think, by the way, over the years ahead, you'll see many communities where something similar happens. Labour have played the identity politics stuff with regards to, for instance, British Jews. All British Jews think the same thing, and if you don't agree with that, then you're not one of them. Let's see how that pans out, guys. I say that as somebody who's a British Iranian. Because, by the way, there are many British Iranians who think very differently to me. That's how it works. Take people on an individual basis rather than clustering them all together as this kind of monolith, which, by the way, never happens with white people. Funny that. Anyway, Brighton Pavillion has been the only Green Party seat since 2010, and it's been held by Caroline Lucas. And now the Greens are targeting 4 seats on July 4th, as I've already said, but keeping that constituency, well, that's the bare minimum. Particularly as the party's candidate there is now Sian Berry. Win there, and it demonstrates that the party's national profile is not a one-person band. And I'm joined now by Sian from Brighton Pavillion. Sian, are you going to win?
Well, my team are continuing to work incredibly hard. It really does look like it might pay off, but there's still so many days to go and so much that could change. We're taking nothing for granted. We are making plans for polling day that are the biggest we've ever made for this constituency, because we know that Labour still think they can get rid of all Green opposition in the next Parliament. We have to stop them, and we're making sure that we're pulling out every single stop that we can to make sure that happens.
And what kind of resources have they put into the seat? You know, you said Labour are really going for Brighton Pavillion. They've got targets very nearby as well, of course. Worthing is one very high profile with, you know, a Tory seat that I think has literally never been anything but Tory. But you're saying that they're going for you. Is it a high target constituency for the Labour Party, do you think, Brighton Pavillion?
I mean, I don't know what their internal plans are, but certainly we are in between these two very strong target areas for them. So we are seeing a lot of special guests, a lot of visitors coming. We've had Keir Starmer here, which he wouldn't normally come along to not a very high target seat. So we are seeing lots of activity, and people are coming here to campaign. We can see that there's more Labour people on the streets than we've seen before in a campaign here since the first time that Caroline won. So we really are in a 2010 situation, and we are treating it like that. In the Greens, we're treating it very, very seriously and working incredibly hard to make sure that we speak to as many people as we possibly can. And when we speak to people, we're having a great time, to be honest. People really get the fact that Brighton has been a very special place, not only for the city to have a green voice in amongst the other MPs for the city, but also that it's had national significance, that Caroline's really put them on the map. So we are getting lots of really, really good responses, but we are aware that Labour are going around saying different things, and so we have to keep speaking to people.
You're being very judicious with your language. I mean, I've seen the polling, and it does seem quite favourable for you. Of course, polls can always be wrong.
Not all of them, though. Not all of them.
Not all of them. What polls don't show you significantly ahead?
The MRPs have been all over the place. I had to spend a whole evening calming down everyone, my mum included, when one of them showed that we were set to lose by quite a lot. So the variability in the polls is absolutely huge. And so we don't know really what the situation is until polling day. We have to keep working.
I suppose that is interesting, isn't it? Of course, the Greens have had this seat since 2010. Labour have not won a general election since 2010. We're kind of in new terrain. What's the major issues that are being raised with you by voters locally, which aren't necessarily national? What is specific to Brighton Pavillion that we might not be hearing about in the national news or from national politicians?
And that's a really interesting question, actually. I mean, I've spent the last year meeting lots of different local campaign groups who are working on specific issues. There are issues that the council makes decisions on, where certainly I've been involved in campaigns. There was a big planning application from the company here that makes arms and components for fighter and bomber jets that are being used in Israel. That's been a bone of contention in the city for a very long time. And they had a planning application that was about expanding their operations, and that was lost. There was some really, really good campaigning and discussions within the council about this company expanding its operations here, and how we're a city of sanctuary, it doesn't fit with our values, it would create community tension, and that was really significant campaign, and that's something where I supported the campaigners, and it was just delightful to get that victory. So that was really good. We also have ongoing problems with sewage, not only in the sea. Well, obviously, there's a big swimming contingent within the constituency. Lots of people are here because of the access to the sea, and if they're checking them out every single day to see if it's full of sewage, they are very, very concerned about that. So our plan for the water companies to bring them properly back into public hands is very, very popular here. And then we've also got parts of the city where sewage regularly bubbles up from the drains because of the poor infrastructure. And that's another reason why that's high on people's agenda. But otherwise, people are asking me to work hard to stop the NHS from being further privatised, to get real funding in. Our wealth tax is very, very popular on the doorstep. People raise issues like access to education, particularly special educational needs education is very tight around here. And there've been, Brighton's got a real housing crisis, so people bring up housing issues, but that also means that we've got pressures, downward pressures on the number of children at primary schools. And so some primary schools have been closed by the council in ways that residents don't feel like the council's really been listening to them. So I've been listening to residents and working with the heads and the governors and trying to make sure their voices are heard when they've got alternative plans to maybe phase out a school more slowly, or make sure the building is retained so that they can use it for example, a nursery. There's lots of, sorry, I could go on for hours about this. I've been very, very actively working with the community on lots of different issues, and it's like a lot of places, there are problems that are caused by austerity, and having a voice that asks the government to make sure that the council is properly funded so that we're not fighting off things that we shouldn't be, but also things that are unique to Brighton, like our really strong values, and the fact that that can be expressed in a planning decision just made me so happy.
And has anything surprised you with the Labour campaign? It seems from the outside, it seems quite negative. The Labour candidate, I believe, is a gentleman called Tom Gray. I don't know anything about him, but it's generally been quite a critical campaign from their side, targeting you rather than a propositional vision for Brighton. Or am I being unfair?
No, I agree with you. And I've signed and promised, and I always do this, a clean campaign promise. I'm signed up to all the campaigns, the Compassionate Politics campaign, the Joe Cox campaign for civility. All these things are really important to me. How you campaign is a sign of how you'll be in office, and the ethics don't stop or start on the day you're elected. It's all part of the same picture. It's about how you are as a politician. And I have been very disappointed that particularly the regional Labour Party have been launching some quite personal attacks against me, which I won't repeat, obviously. But that is disappointing when, clean campaigning is about discussing the issues that people are raising. It's about being honest about your own record, your record with your opponents, and it's about not doing personal attacks. And I'm afraid I have some.
That's really interesting. Building on that ever so slightly, what do you make of Dale Vince? Of course, he's the chief executive CEO of Ecotricity, big energy company, green credentials. I've met him, very interesting backstory. He used to be a new age traveler back in the day. He is, an eco-entrepreneur. He's campaigning for Labour. That's not really a surprise. Okay, fine. But he's doing it against both you and Carla Denyer in Brighton Pavillion and Bristol Central. What do you make of that?
Yeah, Dale's been around, I've met Dale as well. He's been around the Green movement for a very long time, and he's supported the Greens before, Extinction Rebellion, he's a well-known supporter of, and he's often given money and support to the Labour Party as well. It is a surprise to see him coming and specifically targeting the seats where Labour are trying to win against a Green incumbent, or where they're defending against a very strong Green campaign, as opposed to helping them to win in the Conservative seats where people have the same kind of issues and concerns. It's very odd. I can't explain why he's doing that. But it is good that the two main Green NGOs made very clear in their scoring that after the Greens, we have a near perfect score. In fact, we lost some points on one of them, which I'm not sure exactly why we didn't give them more details about those policies. But there are other areas when the scoring where they said, this is the maximum we could give the Greens, but they go beyond our demands. So we really genuinely have a near perfect record with those NGOs and a very good relationship. And they gave Labour only 51% of their scoring, and said basically that the Labour proposals, apart from on green electricity, were basically quite below half, below standard. And they said it was far, far from enough, the investment that they're putting in outside of that one area. And where that in that one area, a lot of what they're promising is to essentially do PFI type schemes, work with the private sector, where that means that in 20 or 30 years' time, if we have got a decarbonised electricity grid, we'll be paying a lot of profits to those private providers. And that doesn't make a lot of sense when we know that investment in renewable energy is just very good value in its own right, extremely profitable at the moment, like a really, really good thing for public money to go into. Doesn't make a lot of sense. But yeah, on the wider green issues around climate, but around also nature, removing barriers to protest, things that Dale has supported in the past, removing the bans on different types of protest. Labour have scored badly on, so it doesn't make sense for him to endorse them quite so wholeheartedly, and certainly not against a party that is basically perfect on the issues he cares about.
I have to say, I find it very odd indeed. I was looking at the Green target seat of Waveney Valley, which of course is a Conservative seat. I'm thinking, Dale, go there. That would be so much more useful. I have one more question for you. It's about the debate tonight. You've got Adrian Ramsey appearing alongside Nigel Farage on the BBC. Do you think that the Greens actually have been given a fair crack of the whip by the media in this election? It does feel like you've been a lot more prominent, particularly in broadcast.
Well, it's the number of candidates we're standing that kind of governs the amount of times they have to have us on. We are standing in every seat but one, the same number of places that Labour is standing across England and Wales, and that means we get more balance, and that's really good. Carla and Adrian have been fantastic in these interviews and debates that I've seen them in. Pitch perfect, getting across really, really important messages about the Greens, embodying our values, and being completely unflappable. When Nick Robinson produced that burger, did you see Adrian's face? Like, it didn't move. It was absolutely incredible.
Yeah, it is. It's interesting because people have had a vision of sort of political radicalism for so long. It's a radical, angry person, and like the two most relaxed, technocratic people, arguably, amongst the leadership of political parties right now in the UK. Yeah, you've got Keir Starmer, but Carla Denyer and Adrian Ramsey they look like, this is not an insult. They look like very calm bureaucrats, which, given the radicalism of the manifesto, is probably quite useful.
They are enjoying themselves. That's the key thing. Keir Starmer really doesn't look like he's enjoying himself at all. And their contributions have been great because they have set the terms of some of the rest of the debate. The fact that we talk about the two-child benefit cap being a gap in Labour's manifesto, the fact that we've raised the wealth tax so effectively and defended it against lots and lots of different attacks, and the media is still asking us about this, but we've always been able to make our case because we spent so long putting it together that we really do know why we're proposing that. And so that has meant that some interviewers have been putting those questions directly to Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak in those other debates and other situations where we're not getting a look in. So we are actually changing the debate and having our questions asked. And that's how we'll be in Parliament. We're going to raise things, put them on the agenda, make sure the other parties are answerable for why they're not doing good ideas, as well as holding them to account over things like, when the next post office scandal is brewing, we saw successive governments not taking action on that. And we want there to be Green MPs who will not be under the whip, who will be able to ask questions about whatever comes next.
Sian Berry, thanks for joining me. Good luck, by the way. Good luck, Sian. Am I meant to say that? Of course I am. Before the Tory party collapsed in England, Scotland was widely viewed as a vital battleground for Labour. Without winning seats there, Labour would, the argument went, stand little chance of forming a government at Westminster. Now, that's not true now, but for the pessimists in Labour's ranks, for whom every seat counts dearly in forming that government, a breakthrough in Scotland remains vital. The party has enjoyed polling leads north of the border for a while now, and that has stayed the same during the course of this election. But it does now seem that the SNP are closing the gap. That's according to new polling conducted by YouGov for Sky News. They've put Labour on 35% of the vote and the SNP on 29%. Now, back in May, that gap was 10 points, according to the same pollster. So good news for the SNP. Their leader, John Swinney, arrived at a difficult time and has seemingly steadied the ship. Earlier today, Swinney launched his party's election campaign Battle Bus, and that'll be travelling the length and breadth of Scotland until polling day next Thursday. And it was there that Swinney outlined the principal arguments for backing the SNP. With less than a week to go until Scotland goes to the polls, the SNP are out campaigning across the country for every vote. The SNP are standing against £18 billion of further Westminster cuts to public services that are already baked into Labour and Tory spending plans. We're fighting to protect the NHS from privatisation, from Starmer and Sunak, and pass a law that keeps our health service safe in public hands where it belongs. We are the only major party focused on giving the people of Scotland their democratic right to choose their own future and rejoin the European Union as an independent nation. Scotland's values are the SNP's values, and only the SNP can be trusted to stand up for Scotland in Westminster. On 4th of July, vote SNP for a future made in Scotland for Scotland. So, independence, no repeat of austerity, a public NHS, and rejoining the EU. Those are the lines that differentiate the SNP from what's viewed as the Westminster Uniparty. Now, you might say that's the SNP's greatest hits. Perhaps, but they have served them well. And a reminder, Scotland voted to remain in the EU by a margin of 62 to 38. And we know the UK as a whole has significantly shifted to criticism of Brexit in the last 4 years. So without doubt, actually, that result, if it was to be played out again, another referendum, it would be even more in the Remain camp. So, what's it like in Scotland? Joining me to discuss the SNP from Glasgow is David Jameson. He's the co-editor of Conta. David, the most recent polling for YouGov has Labour ahead on 36, but the SNP closing on 29. That still means major gains for Labour, but why are the SNP closing that lead if the polling is to be believed?
I don't know how much I trust any of these polls. They swing very wildly between the SNP going down to single figures all the way through to the SNP maintaining most of their seats in this election. I think the only certainty is that the SNP will lose seats. By what degree, by how much, it's very hard to say. From my point of view, I think if the SNP win, say, 20 or more seats, they can spin that, Swinney has stabilised the party, stopped the worst of its decline, and that the only way is up. Remember that in Scotland, this election can be seen as kind of preparatory to the Scottish elections in 2026. And Swinney's hope will be that if he stabilises the party's decline in this general election, he gives himself a launching pad to rebuild the party for 2026, by which point he assumes, and I think it's a fairly safe assumption, Starmer will be hated. And the election, the struggle between Labour and the SNP, that struggle will be kind of back in the SNP's favour to an extent, just because of the extent to which Starmer has become a kind of hate figure.
So earlier on today, John Swinney said that the SNP are, quote, standing against £18 billion of further Westminster cuts to public services that are already baked into Labour and Tory spending plans. He's basically saying austerity 2.0, both parties are offering it. I personally agree with that, but I'm curious, is that a compelling argument still for the Scottish electorate? Because obviously Starmer is doing a very good job at differentiating himself from the Tories in England and Wales. Now, you could say that's because the Tories are worse than ever before, but whatever the reason, he's not really viewed as on a par with the Tories in England. I know Scotland's always been slightly different, but I'm curious as to the austerity argument and whether it's still going to wash, given precisely how bad the Tories have been over the last 2, 3, 4 years.
It's an interesting one because, of course, the coming cuts are one of the great non-stories of this election. I think the IFS had a report out where they said Britain's politicians aren't being honest in this general election about the state of, the fiscal state of the country, the decisions that will have to be made if Starmer's telling the truth and he wants to curb borrowing, not increase taxes, etc. So it should be a big story in this election. And it's interesting that Swinney is targeting that in the final week of the campaign. But the SNP have a huge problem, which is that since 2008, 2009, they have been the administrators of cuts through the Scottish Parliament, through the budgets that are set for local authorities. And, you know, those cuts have been devastating in Scotland. So, you know, we're in danger of returning to this thing in Scottish politics where in the next 4 or 5 years of a Starmer government, you know, the SNP will be saying it's Westminster's fault, Labour will be saying it's Holyrood's fault, and so on. So that should be a more potent argument for the SNP than it in fact is. And that just speaks, I think, to the kind of cruel dichotomy of Scottish politics. So I would say, you know, this idea about there's a new threat of austerity or so on, this isn't a message that's come through strongly in the SNP's campaign. Frankly, no message has come through strongly in the SNP's campaign. There are arguments they could have made about the position that they took over Gaza, calling Ali for a ceasefire. They could have been talking about austerity. They could have been seriously positioning themselves to the left of the Labour Party. But it's all been very slapdash. Arguments have been picked up and shaken around. There's a serious plausibility problem when it comes to the idea that the SNP can position themselves even to the left of, you know, even the most right-wing leader of the Labour Party, authoritarian, pro kind of economic orthodoxy leader of the Labour Party in recent times.
And why is that? Because if nothing else, people over the last decade, save the last 18 months, 2 years, but for much of the last 15 years, let's say, people have generally associated the SNP with being expert political campaigners, one of the most successful political organisations on these islands. They have been very, very good at probing the vulnerabilities of various parties to their own advantage. What you're saying here is that they're missing gimmies, what they call in cricket a dolly catch, whether that's austerity or Gaza. Is that an ideological problem? Is it an organizational problem? Do they simply not have the kind of personnel, the caliber of people they had 4, 5, 10 years ago?
I think it's rooted first and foremost, as I said, in the experience of the SNP in government over so many leaders, so many years, through such a period of austerity and through a period of war and general political disruption. I mean, I think that's quite fundamental. But beyond that, I think the SNP have really serious organisational problems, and they are only set to get worse. So the SNP has this famous campaigning machine, especially after 2014. You know, it could put armies of canvassers out onto the streets of communities up and down Scotland. It became a common sight in Scottish elections and in Westminster elections to see the leader of the SNP touring around the country in a helicopter with his or her face splashed on the side of it. There was an attempt to promote a kind of presidential image. All of this stuff is gone. And partly it's gone because there's no activists. Partly it's gone because there's no money. I haven't seen a single bit of SNP campaigning in my knife edge constituency. So I'm in Glasgow East. This should be one of the most competitive seats in the entire UK, let alone in Scotland. And I have seen nothing. I haven't seen a single bit of SNP campaigning. There are more people campaigning in Glasgow East for the return of the Shah's family to Iran and campaigning for a boycott in the present Iranian presidential election than I've seen in this entire general election campaign. I have seen zero campaigning, nothing. If you look at the pictures of the SNP street campaign, it's all councillors. You know, it's gotten down to that level. It's gotten down to the level where most of the people handing out leaflets for the party in constituencies are getting paid by the party or are paid elected officials. Bear in mind as well, if the SNP loses 20, 25 seats, 30 seats in this general election, this is only going to worsen their financial position. The SNP actually depends quite a lot on short money, which is money that's given to MPs basically to administer their office, to hire staff and so forth. A lot of that money gets passed on to the party to deal with its money troubles. So actually, the exact number of seats they're left with in Westminster has a material impact on the SNP as a party, its ability to campaign, its ability to remain a significant force in Scottish politics. Now, that represents really a dreadful mismanagement of what was a world-beating party just a few years ago. And bear in mind, this isn't like Labour, which has purged a lot of its members and encouraged a lot of the left of its party to leave. The SNP, though it did engage in some kind of purging activities, there was a struggle against internal elected officials a few years ago. Its members have simply walked away. And, you know, it almost doesn't matter the numbers of members they claim at this point. The proof's in of the pudding's in the eating. They can't get them out to campaign. There's no one on the streets campaigning for the SNP. So I think there's disarray in the organisation. I also suspect it's still quite there's a factional conflict among the elected representatives in the party. Stephen Flynn often seems to be doing his own thing. He's clearly an ambitious person, and I think, he's in Project Stephen Flynn at this point, and there doesn't seem to be a lot of coordination between him and other leading figures in the party actually in Scotland. And there's no central message. It's highly reactive to events that are taking place in the campaign elsewhere.
Are Labour any better in terms of getting people out to campaign and canvass? You said you've not received any SNP literature in a knife-edge constituency. What's the score with Labour? And then secondly, again, quickly, please, would the SNP be happy if they got 29% of the vote, given all the challenges you're talking about? I mean, given the fact they've had this terrible few years, they've lost all the money, the largesse has gone, the big figures have gone. I mean, that would be quite good by the sounds of it. You're painting a very bleak picture of the SNP, but the reality is, if YouGov is right, they would still keep maybe even a couple of dozen seats.
If the SNP got 29%, I think they'd be over the moon. And I think Scottish Labour should be seriously worried if they get anything like that. And on the first question, no, Labour's campaign is invisible as well. I'm not seeing any activists. I've not met a single Labour activists during this campaign. And remember, Scotland is one of the parts of the UK where the Labour Party was once, this aristocracy, practically. So no, I mean, it's not like the decline of the SNP has seen a rebirth for the Labour Party at all. And I haven't met anyone who's enthusiastic about voting Labour. They will increase their share of the seats, certainly. But, it's a similar picture as the rest of the UK. Does anyone not expect Starmer to romp home in this election and then just be hated within months, right? So I'm not seeing stability here. I'm not seeing a return to, I think even a couple of years ago, people wanted to say this election was about overturning the populist insurgencies in British politics. And you could say the SNP was one of those. I don't believe that at all. I don't think there's any enthusiasm for reviving the kind of Westminster establishment that 2014 and 2015 were fundamentally a rebellion against. I think that the SNP is going to be punished for their failures in recent years, but that doesn't imply any real revival in support for Scottish Labour at all.
So interesting. And then finally, on a party that people generally wouldn't view as particularly relevant north of the border, and they'd be right, the Tories are on 11% according to this poll, and Reform, and I find this fascinating, David, Reform are on 8%. Now, the Tories, obviously, their big selling point has been that they're a unionist party, but there is a new right-wing party on the block. Clearly, they're unionists too. They're far more socially conservative. Is there a possibility that if Reform is here to stay, and that, of course, is an open question, that the party of Nigel Farage actually becomes a long-term home for the very few remaining Scottish Conservatives?
I think that's a serious proposition. So yes, they recently appeared with 8%. Remember, Scotland had a UKIP MEP. I mean, Scottish Liberals often like to pretend that we have this completely different political atmosphere in Scotland. And there are differences, right? 8% isn't what Reform are polling in England or Wales. There is a difference. But I mean, I think this is interesting. I think if Reform can build a base, even a relatively small one in Scotland, it's not out of bounds that they win seats in a future Scottish election. Remember, we have a kind of dual voting system in Scottish elections, and you can win kind of list seats. I don't think it's beyond imagination that Reform win list seats in Scotland. And it would be interesting to see what their programme was in Scotland, because UKIP often erred towards a kind of, I think their policy was actually, don't quote me on this, I think their policy was to shut the Scottish Parliament. Now, I think in coming years there will be questions about the Scottish Parliament, about its culture, about what it's achieved and what it hasn't achieved. It's very easy to present the Scottish political class around Holyrood as sort of indolent and self-serving, because they are, and very self-indulgent and very cut off from the country, because they are. So I think it would be very interesting if Reform were to establish, basically, even if it wasn't for closing the Parliament itself, maybe hemming in the Parliament, adopting a platform of ridicule of the Scottish political class, that could be effective on the right. And yes, the Scottish Tories are moribund. They are rubbish. I mean, they are seriously rubbish. Their current leader, Douglas Ross, a very nasty piece of work, sort of anti-traveller figure when he was just a lowly MSP. His political career has died mid-election campaign, and no one seems to care. No one really knows who he is. I know that sometimes Ruth Davidson was presented as a potential saviour of the Scottish Tory party. She absolutely was not. She left it in a mess. It's still a mess now. It was a mess when she was in charge of it. So yeah, there is a right-wing vote in Scotland that's there for the taking. And if Reform have some serious heads in Scotland, and I'm not seeing any, I mean, part of the problem for the Reform is they're kind of a one-man band. But if they got a strategy together, I could see a future for Reform in Scotland if they adapted to domestic political questions here in this country. I don't think that's beyond imagination at all.
Thank you, David Jameson, for joining me here on Novara Media. David is such a smart guy. Follow him on Twitter. Really, really, really clever person. Lots of really clever Scots who came out of the independence movement in 2014. I follow lots of them. I always find them really useful to listen to on a range of stuff, but particularly Scotland, particularly as an English person who's miles away from Scotland. Channel 4 News has conducted an undercover investigation into Reform UK's campaign for Nigel Farage in Clacton. Maybe you've heard of it. And as you might expect, some of his supporters revealed the party's dark side when they didn't know the cameras were running. Andrew Parker is a Reform campaigner in the constituency who claims to have a close relationship with Farage. While out door knocking, he gave his opinion of the Prime Minister to an undercover reporter.
Yeah. I've always been a Tory voter. What annoys me is he got in. What's good is he? You tell me, he's just wet. What, Sunak? Useless.
We'll get back to that in a moment. Now, Rishi Sunak has reacted to that slur, saying this.
My two daughters have to see and hear Reform people who campaign for Nigel Farage calling me an effing It hurts and it makes me angry. And I think he has some questions to answer. And I don't repeat those words lightly. I do so deliberately because this is too important not to call out clearly for what it is.
Nigel Farage was asked about Parker's comments by Channel 4 News.
Would you apologise to the Prime Minister for the appalling racist way that one of your campaigners spoke about Rishi Sunak?
That was horrible.
Do you apologise to the Prime Minister?
It was horrible.
That's not quite an apology, is it?
You can't, how much further can I go? Of course this is an apology. It was horrible. I don't know who this bloke is. Somebody I met once years ago. I mean, awful, horrible. Almost as bad as the Labour candidate in Clacton and his slurs on white people. Have you covered that?
I'm here to focus
No.
on...
Have you covered the Labour? No.
We scrutinise all of the parties and their campaigns. But if you are as appalled by this as you say you are, why are you trying to deflect? Why are you trying to deflect if you are as appalled as you say you are?
Have you covered the racism of the Labour
Because I would like to ask you also about the members of your inner circle, because they've also made homophobic, racist, xenophobic comments. People who have senior roles in your campaign in Clacton.
I would drink white men's tears. I'm standing for black and Asian people, not pretty.
There's Nigel Farage there responding with tweets and an interview with the Labour candidate in the constituency. By the way, one of those tweets was before he was a party candidate. And I don't think any reasonable person would say that's on a par. A young person, you might think it's a tasteless joke or whatever, I don't think that's the same as somebody who's canvassing, calling the Prime Minister the P word. Maybe you disagree. I just think that's in no way commensurate. And frankly, I don't think Nigel Farage thinks that. Referring to the Prime Minister by a racial slur wasn't Parker's only display of abject racism. Here are just a few more of his views.
The immigration thing, use the word illegal, emphasise illegal, especially if you open the door to a bunch of sick, mate, sick mother. It's a cult. I tell you what, if you don't know about Islam, it's the most disgusting cult out. We're kicking our Muslims out of the mosques and then turn them into Witherspoons. We've got D11 here, and all the place near Dover, army recruitment. Get the young recruits there, yeah, with guns on the beach, target practice, just shoot them. That's what the Greeks done. You know about that, you know, the Greeks shot us. Yes. Look at the Australians. None of it. I just think ring fence Bradford-Stan round and just do that. I was like, yeah, you've got these bastards running our country. You must be joking, mate. Keep flying that flag. And do us a favour, you're a paramedic and that not getting your ambulance, just don't put oxygen on the bastard, use something else. You know where I'm coming from.
Utterly extraordinary. It's like a parody of racism. And that stuff obviously exists, but catch it on camera is pretty special. Parker wasn't the only Farage campaigner to hold those kinds of views. And this is important because, of course, you can just say it's just one person. Something broader is happening here. George Jones is Farage's event organiser, a staffer who's stuck with the Clacton candidate since his UKIP days. Channel 4 captured this conversation between him, Reform's press officer Dan Dukes, the party's Tottenham candidate Roger Gravett, and its campaign director, Rob Bates.
This is the shit I'm talking about. That's outrageous.
The car has a pride flag on its bonnet.
You see that degenerate flag on the front bonnet? What the old Bill doing promoting that crap? He's about catching nonsense, not promoting it. I mean, the car doesn't even look particularly...
Well, when we form the government in 2029, then surely we can change lots of things.
But mate, yeah, the policemen going to gay pride marches rather than doing their job to be the first on the list.
I'm surprised he's got an Islamic flag on the back of it.
Well, exactly. But that's the irony of it, though, Roger. That's the irony, mate. That lot and the other lot have got some sort of weird sort of agreement. It's like sort of Stalin and Hitler before they invaded, Poland together. And actually, the irony of it is, if the Islamists take over, the people on the front bonnet will be the first up against the wall. Yeah, of course they are.
How do we help them?
Well, I suggest all our police officers go down to the local gay pride march and dance around like fairies for a few days at the taxpayers' expense.
It'll involve them.
It's not like we've got a crime wave hitting this country, is it? So why not? They've got time to kill.
Yeah, but aren't we just going to feed the problem?
This is virtue signalling nonce bullshit.
I mean, George, we're feeding the problem because we're doing 40,000 more.
40,000 more what?
Police officers.
I hope.
So that's the plan. Yeah, but we're going to have 40,000 straight,
But they'll be also, our police officers will be paramilitaries, they won't be police. We're going to bring back the news.
This is somebody who's very experienced and been with Farage for a really long time. And look, you try to be not diplomatic, but even-handed and fair. Some people don't think that a police car should have a pride flag on it because they would say, I don't think there should be any symbols of any political type on a state vehicle. They might even say that, look, police officers shouldn't wear a poppy, nothing, right? Fine. But he's saying that they shouldn't have that on the front of the car and they should be catching nonces, not promoting them. I think that's what he said. That was the formulation. As if all gay people or bi people or trans people are paedophiles. And that is just out and out homophobia of the first order. There will be gay members of Reform. Of course there will be. I've met gay members of UKIP, the Brexit Party, gay people voted for them. This is out and out homophobia. And also this idea of, Muslims and gay people somehow being this coalition against, the silent majority, which of course this gentleman somehow magically represents. Come on. Look, like I say, people can have a wide range of views on stuff. You can articulate them in a civilized manner. Personally, I don't think that police officers should have any kind of symbols on their person. The thin blue line thing, which by the way has now been stopped, I didn't agree with. You might say a poppy. I just don't think you open the floodgates to that. I just don't think it's right for them to have political symbols. Now you might say, well, no, the NHS or whatever cause I like, but then I don't want the thin blue line stuff, right? Because in the US in particular, that became a basic shorthand for far right views. It did in the US. It did. So I'm not really down with that. So I can listen to that point being made, but make it in a sensible, civilized manner. Don't deal in homophobia or Islamophobia, awful things. And what Farage has said is that first person we saw, he's an actor. He said this on Loose Women earlier today as well. It doesn't add up.
Before we get into different things, I think we need to address some of the footage that was broadcast last night on Channel 4 News. I know that you will want to.
Yeah.
And just to give people an idea in case they haven't seen it, this was undercover footage which was recorded by Channel 4 News. And we heard a canvasser for Reform UK making extremely racist comments about the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, describing him as a P word. And can I just say that some of this is offensive, so I apologise in advance. He also said about illegal immigrants, their target practice, just shoot them.
He did.
And another individual, who's a long-serving Reform campaigner, made homophobic comments describing a pride flag on a police car as a degenerate flag. Now, I see that you have tweeted this morning saying that one of these people was an actor.
Yeah.
What are you suggesting?
So, I saw all the footage last night. I thought, no one speaks like that. It was just stream after stream of invective. No one speaks like that. You know, we're going to turn mosques into Wetherspoons. And it all seemed a bit over the top. So someone told us he was an actor. We rang him this morning. The Daily Telegraph rang him this morning. He denied point blank that he was an actor. It turns out he is an actor. I found his website. He's a well-spoken actor who does something called rough speaking. Well, I was in the office when he arrived last Saturday, and he was doing rough speaking. It was an act right from the very start.
So you've met him?
I was working, and he came in and came up to me and said hello, and then he went out canvassing where the undercover filming took place. And he was rough speaking. He wasn't being himself from day one. I have to tell you, this whole thing is a complete and total setup. Of that, I have no doubt whatsoever.
Okay. Well, then explain the views of this person who you've been working alongside since your UKIP days. I mean, they're pretty damn close, right? And if that person is an actor, there's no evidence for him being an actor with regards to being an embedded actor here. I mean, we don't know. It's an unfolding story, but there's no evidence to suggest that, other than the fact the guy is a part-time actor as a job. He is emulating somebody you've literally worked alongside for, the best part of a decade. There was a poll out today from More in Common, or maybe it was yesterday, in the last 24 hours, and it shows people's favourite drinks and their voter preferences. Now we can get this up. As you can see, the fieldwork was done between the 17th and the 19th of June, and of course, Labour has a lead. They're leading in polls, 39, Tories on 25. But then let's break it down, and let's just not look at the Tory and Labour parties. As you'll see, for instance, the Greens do very well amongst IPA drinkers. Is that a surprise? Maybe not. Craft beer, hipster weirdos. I don't mind a craft beer. What does that say? And I might even vote Green too. Craft beer, IPA, very popular amongst Labour and Green voters. As you can see, the Tories still only prevail with a single beverage drinker, and that's the sherry enjoyer. Even with brandy, with whiskey, with G&T, they're behind. But this, for me, shows how cooked the centre-right is in this country. Pimm's drinkers, they're more likely to vote Labour. That's a 14-point lead for Labour amongst Pimm's drinkers. That's pretty incredible. And then cider, very good for the Lib Dems. Of course, they have a Southwest base, and they're there with sherry too. They're nibbling into that older sherry voting base. The only people left in the country that still vote Tory seemingly drink sherry. I thought that was quite funny. I'd be interested in more polling like that in the future. It's quite amusing. And once you see the data, you go, that kind of makes sense. You've been watching Novara Media. Good night.